I woke up on Sunday morning and I decided that I was going to go to church. I think I changed what I was wearing about like 5 times. I couldn't decide because I wanted to be modestly dressed, but I also wanted to look stylish. There was always a bit of judgment on how you looked at my church at home because we were encouraged to dress nicely, and I thought the same kind of would apply here. I ended up settling on a red dress that hit me at the knee and a pair of heels. I left my dorm later than I thought, but I decided it was okay because I didn't want to give someone the chance to sit by me at the service. I was just about to the church house when I saw this girl walking on the side of the road. She was wearing a black sweater paired with a black skirt with big red roses on it. This particular skirt hit the girl's mid-calf, which was perfectly appropriate for church and maybe a bit of an overkill. I decided that she had to be going to the same church as me. The good thing to do would be pick her up, so the inner voice spoke up inside me and told me to pick her up, and I did. So I pulled over and asked if she was going to the LDS church service at noon, and she replied with a enthusiastic yes. She got in, and the first thing she said was, "Oh my gosh, you're such a queen, thank you so much." Then I drove around the corner and parked in front of the church house. As we got out of the car and walked, she hit me with like 4 other compliments, either about my clothing or how it was really kind of me to pick her up. It was kind of strange how friendly she was, and it made me feel a little uncomfortable. I didn't know whether to compliment her back or just to say thank you and move on. I decided on the latter and just let her talk. I did, however, manage to tell her that it was my first time attending the young single adult ward in Boise. After this comment, she got even more complimentary and wouldn't stop talking. I know this tactic. One of the main focuses of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is to bring people back to the gospel and to the gospel. I consider myself an inactive member, which basically means that I don't attend church that often or at all. You could imagine the excitement this girl felt, though. An inactive member. This was her perfect missionary moment. A missionary is usually a young adult that goes out and studies the gospel. Anyways, I believe this is why she was so invested and talkative to me. Don't get me wrong, she was really kind, super nice, but I felt if it was like a little ingenuine because of her motives. Her motives weren't to actually be my friend, they were just to get me to come back to church. I'm pretty familiar with this because I've watched it happen repeatedly back home where my family attends church regularly. We walked into the chapel and I was a bit surprised at how many people were there. There's only about 50 people. This was really strange because I came from a church where well over 100 people would attend. The difference was not only the amount of people, but the fact that this was a service filled with single adults ages 18 to 30. We sat down and I hadn't noticed, but we had sat right next to Julianne Gee. Julianne Gee is a girl from my hometown who was in the same church ward all growing up. This was very strange because we had spent so much time in the past attending church together. It was also quite nostalgic seeing her again in the same setting years later. We exchanged an aloof hello and sat in silence until the service started. While minimal chatter continued, the bishop got up to the pulpit and welcomed everyone. This seemed very casual and informal compared to other churches I've been to. The bishop then introduced the speakers of the day and sat down. As I started looking around the chapel, I noticed, second nature as a girl, liking guys, the amount of attractive looking guys. They were all clean cut, wearing suits with white shirts and ties. I also noticed the women and wasn't too impressed. About 50% of the women seemed a little overweight and not as attractive. I know this seems a little bit judgmental, but it's just what I observed. They were all dressed modestly with high necklines and long skirts and sleeves. After this observation, I felt a little bit self-conscious about myself. I felt really modestly dressed when I left the house or left my dorm that morning, but I began tugging at the length of my dress and pulling at the neckline in hopes to try and cover up. It was interesting how my perceptions of myself changed because of the environment I was in. On campus, I feel very confident about my choice in clothing, but going to this culture and being immersed in it again made me want to conform and dress like everyone else in hopes of blending in. I think a lot of this type of thinking came from growing up in a very conservative religious community. In that type of community, it's easy to get caught up in worrying about what others think of you, and I felt right back into old ways of thinking within 15 minutes of being back in this church setting. So I could tell the girl I was sitting by was very religious and dedicated to living the gospel pretty thoroughly. I wanted to write really kind of critical notes or like honest notes about this service, but I knew she'd be reading it right over my shoulder, so I didn't write anything. Me and her then sang the hymns together, and it reminded me of singing in church with my mom. Music was one of the reasons my mom actually decided to leave the church. She always says how she'd start going to church again when they stopped making her sing "Families Can Be Together Forever." One of the verses of this song goes like this: "I have a family here on earth. They are so good to me. I want to share my life with them through all eternity." My mom and my dad were divorced and thought that this particular song, or my mom thought this particular song the church sang was misleading. It made her feel like a failure and that she was somehow unworthy. There was also shame that she felt from the other members about this specific subject, since there was so much pressure to be married and have an eternal family. So the first speaker was a woman who talked about the importance of the hymns at church. She is a music major here at Boise State, and so she had a lot to say about the music and how it affects us and our worship. I interviewed a girl from my hometown, Mariah, and asked her about the importance of music. She expressed that music at church was her favorite part. It made her feel like worship was fun. She also thought it was fun because she felt like she got to participate in the service and worship God with the rest of the congregation. It was interesting seeing her point of view on attending a young single adult ward at BYU Idaho, the college she attends. I was taken aback at some of the differences she expressed, one of them being the motivations for attending church. At BYUI, a religious school, students are required to go to church in order to go to school. Mariah said that most of the students go to church just to fulfill a requirement, making some of the content and material presented at church lacking. The service then continued with 2 more speakers, a musical number by the choir, and a closing prayer. As everyone filed out of the chapel, I saw more people that I knew. One of the girls I knew is actually in my discussion group for my UF class. I've never made any connections with her and her comments about religion and the LDS Church. I knew she had conservative views, but I never really connected the dots. And I knew she grew up really conservative, but just never really put it together. After the service, I drove home and I reflected on how the services I've attended previously and the one here that I went to, and how different they are. And the LDS Church preaches that all churches are the same. And I do believe that, but I think they all have their unique differences, and it's not a bad thing, and it's a good thing. I'm really glad I went and I could experience what it was like here and broaden my understanding of what church is supposed to be versus what it is.